Sybok is excited to see Spock, though not for the reasons you might have expected from a religious leader. It calls to mind something that happened on Chris Berry's show, The British Empire, where in the last episode he died, but then Heaven decided to send him back at the end of the episode. They then went on to make more episodes of the show, most of which sucked. But one thing I thought was clever was that sometime afterwards, a group of fundamentalists sought him out to try to learn more about what it was like to die and come back to life. Now apply that here. You have a religious leader seeking ultimate knowledge who has now come into the presence of a man who has just returned from death to life. And they don't care about that. Once again, Star Trek is proving to be less well thought out than a British sitcom. Sybok's pleased with Spock, especially when he tries to arrest him, but says he can't do that because he needs their ship. Kirk can't believe this.
You staged all this to get your hands on my ship?
Who are you?
James T. Kirk, captain of the Enterprise.
Sybok realizes he's just been tricked and calls it very clever, though that's probably just a way of saving face. Better to say that you were tricked by a very clever ruse than admitting it wasn't terribly cunning and you fell for it anyway. Then again, all this very clever move allowed was for Kirk himself to come down, which again plays into that whole Kirk is one of the only 4 competent people there are theme that we have going on here. They head back up, but Claw is closing in.
Race shields. The shuttle. Do it.
Finally, this movie's looking up for me. The shuttle needs to use a special tractor beam to land properly, leaving the Enterprise defenseless. Sybok refuses to turn back, so Kirk improvises Emergency Landing Plan B. B as in barricade. Well, why are you talking in code instead of just saying what you mean? If the Klingons intercept, it won't matter, and the people on the shuttle know what you're doing. At least it could have been implied he was trying to clue them into his situation, though knowing this film, it'd probably be something like Emergency Landing Plan Ostage Hey Elp Hey. So they fly in and crash the shuttle, and everyone is thrown about, though uninjured, just like most people in high-speed collisions who aren't wearing seatbelts. This, by the way, is as close as Sulu is allowed to get to being competent in this film, managing to get most of the shuttle inside. Chekhov orders them to warp away, evading the shot from the bird of prey. Claw orders pursuit and then comments, "He's good." Chekhov? Sulu? Of course not. This film is a love letter to James T. Kirk, damn it, where even his enemies must acknowledge his awesomeness at every turn. Sybok and Kirk are the first to get their senses back, and Sybok gets the gun first. Well, you know how this can only end, don't you? During the battle between Sybok and Peter Pan, the gun gets tossed away to Spock's feet. And naturally, seeing his best friend strangled, Spock needs Kirk to actually tell him to pick the damn thing up before he does anything about it. Sybok just closes in on him, and Kirk, in his typically subtle way, orders Spock to shoot him. But, well, he doesn't. Noob Sybok wins. However, Spock refuses to join Sybok, and he, McCoy, and Kirk are led to the brig by Chicken Skin. And presumably Kirk will take on a Vulcan with 3 times his strength, but not someone who weighs 45 pounds soaking wet. He's a sportsman, damn it. Kirk swears the whole way, using words that fans always scream at me about using when I talk about their favorite franchise, which always amuses me because we've actually heard their regulars talk this way throughout every movie except the first one, the one where people complained. I don't know. Apparently if you like TMP, you didn't watch any more Trek films. Anyway, Kirk gets worked up when McCoy says the second line he's had in the past 20 minutes. Kirk turns on him and tells him to shut up. Considering it's the director, that's probably fairly accurate. "Hey, Bill, can I get a line here?" "Fuck you!" Spock finally reveals that he didn't pull the trigger because Sybok was his brother, or rather half-brother, son of a Vulcan princess. This causes Kirk to sit on the bridge toilet, over which is a sign saying not to use it while in space dock, which ranks as the most bizarre notation I can remember ever seeing in Star Trek. Even leaving aside that there should be no reason it should cause a complication in space dock, it's not like the thing parks for half hour or something. Hell, the Excelsior's been in space dock for like 6 months. Now that's a hell of a long time to hold it. While this is going on, Sybok was doing his share your pain shtick with Sulu and Uhura, and now they come to the bridge and are working for Sybok. Chekhov briefly protests when Sybok approaches him, and soon he'll be working for him too against Kirk. Now, you might recall when we were discussing Star Trek III, I said to remember the point about Sulu and Chekhov. The two learn that Kirk is going to Genesis against orders, and without hesitation volunteers to go along, even if it would cost them their careers. Their loyalty to Kirk and Spock is so great that they'll risk losing everything and probably go to prison for them. Sybok, however, can just undo that with one brief therapy session. Please. This is what I mean when I say the story could have worked maybe if Shatner came up with his own universe, so he can have a hero whose crew would turn on him like he wanted. But this continues the narcissism inherent in this story, which is all about Shatner's own character, overcoming obstacles in the face of betrayal by all. And yeah, I said all. Spock and McCoy were supposed to turn against Kirk too, and the only reason it didn't work that way was because Nimoy and Kelly flat out refused to do it. Spock especially. It was foolish to think that if Kirk gave up everything to restore Spock to life, that Spock could ever voluntarily turn against him. And yet that was to be one of the themes of the piece, that the threesome would be divided and then restored. Why else is it bookended by the camping trips? To show them starting as a family and finishing as one again. But they were never really divided because the story simply doesn't have any way for them to be divided. It doesn't even bother with one for Uhura, Sulu, and Chekhov, whose other purpose is to illustrate how Kirk has been betrayed by those close to him. That's an insulting treatment of the franchise's regulars and shows a complete inability on Shatner's part to understand anyone's character but his own. If your story only works because your leaders are morons, your engineers are incompetent, and your loyal crew is ready to mutiny at the first psychiatrist they come across, then your story is poorly thought out garbage. Sybok now makes a ship-wide announcement on what they're planning to do, and everyone dutifully listens. Wow. Either Sybok was able to brainwash their skeleton crew in like 10 minutes, or else these people hated Kirk so much they were just looking for an excuse to mutiny. Sybok announces their destination as Sha Ka Ree, which causes Spock to puzzle over that, as it was the reason Sybok left Vulcan. I thought you said he was banished, but then you've probably seen how consistent this movie is with itself by now. And just wait, there's more. He announces it lies beyond the Great Barrier in the center of the galaxy, which they will reach according to Sulu in 6.7 hours. Now, let's leave aside the obvious continuity errors you probably already know. That TNG did an episode similar to this where it required Barclay to develop superintelligence to do so. And the Voyager's entire premise is based on speed a century later being much, much slower. Let's be as absolutely fair as possible and take the film on its own. That Enterprise can get from the neutral zone to the center of the galaxy in hours. Then at that speed, forget about having another ship on Earth. You could have a ship practically anywhere in the galaxy to get to Nimbus 3 in a reasonable amount of time. One that actually works! So take it to its logical conclusion, not only are there no experienced commanders nearby, there's no experienced commanders, period! They're all off in Andromeda or the Magellanic Clouds or something. Well, none of that getting in touch with your pain crap is going to work on a Scotsman, so Scotty busts them out of the brig and tells them to take an empty turbolift shaft up to the emergency communicator in the observation room. At this point, we get that scene so face-palmingly unbelievable I had to put it in the opening theme. Scotty just casually walks up the corridor, hits his head on a beam, and is knocked out. You know, when I think of epic searches to find God, one thing that utterly fails to come to mind is the Three Stooges. He'll wake up later with Uhura pawing him in a scene that exists solely to make us feel really uncomfortable. So they begin climbing, except for Spock, who takes one look, says, "Fuck that noise," and runs off. We soon see them passing Deck 12, then Deck 13, very slow since decks are so tall after all, and then Spock arrives, descending of course, since it makes the least amount of sense. He tries to bring Kirk and McCoy up with him, but they're too heavy and descend towards Sulu and the Uglies. Well, Kirk shows what the hell he thinks of Sulu's loyalty by ordering Spock to blast him full in the face with a rocket, propelling them up to discover that the reason the ship is broken is probably because there are some decks that appear twice, and knowing how messed up it truly is, it could be so broken that it has warped space-time. Also, with at least 80 decks, this thing is a frickin' skyscraper in space. So they get there and send out the transmission, and someone claiming to be Starfleet Command answers. Kirk quickly explains the situation, but since there's no caller ID in space, he doesn't know that he just gave himself away to the Klingons, who can now follow them. Claw's busy, though, sitting in his gunner's seat and pretending to shoot things with little pla-pla noises. So Sybok comes in and begins the whole argument that there's nothing to fear from the Great Barrier they're heading through, despite the fact that nothing has ever returned from it.
The people of your planet once believed their world was flat. Columbus proved it was round.
First, Aristotle demonstrated the Earth was round via lunar eclipses, and Eratosthenes actually measured the diameter of the damn thing. It was something that everybody knew. Second, Columbus discovered America. That is, letting contemporary Europe know of its existence. He never proved the world was round. That's like saying the first guy to climb Everest should be considered the first man in space. You gotta go a little bit further than that. Sorry, it's just one of those things that irks me. Sybok makes further remarks. The usual stuff people bring up every time someone says that science says something is impossible and they don't want to buy it. But what it really comes down to is that it's all about Kirk. Sybok wants his respect. Well, hey, you got mine. Anyone who could say these lines with such conviction deserves kudos from his director.